We're in 1 Kings chapter 17. First Kings chapter 17. Let's pray together. Our Holy Father, we're so thankful for another day. We're thankful for this Lord's Day, Holy Father, and for what it means to us, for the privilege we have of calling you our Father, of gathering together as your children for the purpose of worship, Holy Father. Thank you for that great blessing. Thank you for your word as we make an effort, like on occasions like this morning, to study from it, that we would gain a better understanding, even though the events that we're studying about happened long ago, that we'll see the truths that are found therein and how you dealt with mankind back then, and knowing, Holy Father, that that same exists today. Help us, Holy Father, to be people who practice righteousness, who make it our aim to let our light shine before others, who have courage and are always willing to share the good news if there are those who have ears to hear. In Jesus' name, amen. I feel like I just saw a lot of y'all not too long ago. It wasn't a dream, right? We were together singing songs on someone's birthday. The period of time that we're in right now and where we're focusing is on the northern kingdom of Israel, the 10 tribes that have separated themselves under the leadership initially of Jeroboam. But now when Elijah, the Tishbite, comes on the scene, it's during the reign of Ahab. And you remember Ahab's reign was characterized by, he did that which was evil in the sight of Jehovah above all that were before him. That's chapter 16 and verse 30. Elijah comes on the scene, not sure how old he was at this time, not sure about what his life had been about up to this point, but at this point in his life, he's under the direction of God, and more specifically, he is to announce a curse upon the land. There's going to be a famine. There's not going to be rain, chapter 17 and verse 1, and it's not going to rain for a period of a number of years. As soon as he pronounces this curse, God then in turn tells him to go somewhere, and he's to hide himself. And it's at this place that God is going to take care of him for a while. He's going to provide water from a brook, and he'll provide him bread and meat, and those will be brought to him by some ravens who've been appointed to meet him there. So that lasts for a period of time, but at some point in time, because of the drought, the brook dried up. And so he is sent to a widow who lives in Zarephath, verse 9, because God tells him that I have commanded a widow there to sustain thee. So he goes and he meets this woman. He finds the condition she is in, poor, on the brink of starvation, preparing what seems to be her and her son's last meal. Elijah asks for a cup of water, and when she's in the process of bringing that cup of water or going and getting it, he asks her also to bring him something to eat. She replies, and he finds out that they had just enough. Her mindset at that time is, I'm gathering sticks, and I'm going back home, and I'm going to prepare one more meal. It won't be much. And after that, I am resolved to die, as will my son. Elijah says, no, if you'll do this, you bring me, this is what's going to happen. Verse 14, the jar of meal it'll continue, it will not waste. It'll continue to multiply, and so will the oil. We didn't talk about that much last week, but you just have to kind of like think that through for a moment. If you're someone who cooks and you need various things from the cupboard to make those things, well, at some point in time, if you make those things enough, you're going to run out. And you're going to have to go to the grocery store and buy some more of those. Can you imagine what it was like in her mind the very first time she took some stuff out, knew pretty much how much was left, came back the next time and there's more, and she did it again, and just every time she's coming back, there's basically just as much as there was previously. Seemingly, that would be building her faith to some extent regarding this man who's just showed up out of nowhere and then made this request of her and has said this thing to her. But as a result of what little faith she had, again, she not only fed herself, verse 15, but she also fed her son and her house. And the Bible says they ate days, maybe many days. Verse 17, after a period of time, though, the son of the woman, this widow, fell sick, and his sickness was so that he died. The woman says to Elijah, what have I to do with thee, O thou man of God? Art thou, or maybe the statement was, thou art come unto me to bring my sin to remembrance and to slay my son. So we talked about that last week, where initially maybe she lays indirectly the blame at Elijah, but then as she begins to reflect upon her life, she felt like what had happened to her son was a result of her sin. He said unto her, give me thy son. And he took him out of her bosom. Now we see where the child was. And he carried him, Elijah did, into the chamber where he abode, and he laid him on his own bed. And he cried unto Jehovah and said, O Jehovah my God, hast thou also brought evil upon the widow with whom I sojourned by slaying her son? And he stretched himself upon the child 3 times, cried unto Jehovah, and said, O Jehovah my God, I pray thee, let this child's soul come into him again. Okay, so you've had 2 clear indications regarding the death of this boy and how the Bible defines death. Back in verse 17, there was no breath left in him. Couple that with his soul came unto him again. So you have a very unique situation here, not unique to this boy only, because now you could probably think of other examples that are given to us of people who died in the Bible and were brought back to life. And in each of those cases, their souls would have departed their body. And at some point in time, like even in Lazarus' case, after how many days, his soul is brought back to his body. And once that soul would join that body again, he lived just like this boy did. He lived again. Because the spirit, apart from the body, is death. But when the spirit is in the body, that's life. That's why we're here today. Because the souls are still joined to our bodies. But we've been to funerals and we've laid to rest those whom we love and known, and we look at their body. If it's open and in that casket, that is simply just their body. Their soul is no longer there. They are dead physically. But there's more to that story, because we know something regarding that body and what will be joined to it again someday and the change that's going to occur. One, that if we remain faithful to God to the end, that will be glorious. A body like the Lord has. Well, the Lord heard Elijah's prayer, verse 22, and the soul of the child came to him again, and he revived. He took the child, brought him down out of the chamber, gave him back to his mother, and said to her, see, your son lives. I thought about this woman this morning more. And if we think about her life, it's there was a period in time where she grew up, and at some point in time, whatever the custom was, or maybe they just allowed people to fall in love and marry the people that they loved, she married someone. And that had to be a pretty happy time for her. And it got even happier because at some point in time, she conceived and she had a son. But at some point in time after that, her husband died. And that had to be really, really difficult. To be left to raise, as a widow, a boy. And if that wasn't enough, unbeknownst to her, because of the sins of a nation, all of a sudden there begins to be hardship in her life because there's no rain. Clueless in regards to why it won't rain, but that's neither here nor there. As far as she was concerned, life was difficult to the point she's on the brink of starvation when a stranger shows up. And all of a sudden, her life and the life of her son and a family is sustained. Things got good again. At least they did for her, up until the point that her only son, who would at some point in time be old enough to provide for his mother, dies. And her life is struck with tragedy again, only to be given back her son shortly thereafter. You see that? You see what that looks like? It looks like our lives. Because all you have to do is think back in your life, however long you've lived, and you're going to see those highs and you're going to see those lows. And then you're going to see those highs and you're going to see those lows, just like this woman. Well, she receives her son back, and then she immediately says to Elijah, I have this underlined, now I know. That seems to imply that prior to whatever happened here, the raising of her son, that although she would have had some faith, that's obvious by what she did in providing him some meals and stuff like that, that she wasn't to the point where she was now. Now I know. She knew two things. Did you catch the two things she knew? If you color your Bible, you have them colored in two different things because it's two different things. Number one, I know that you're a man of God. And as important as that was, it seems like the second thing triumphs that. I'm not Elijah, but I'm thinking Elijah said, well, that's true, but what you're getting ready to say, and that the word of Jehovah in thy mouth is truth. Now that was solid. Any comments on this woman, this widow in Zarephath? Yes, ma'am.
She says it once, and then he says it to God by killing her son. It seems like that kind of terminology is where people in the world believe that God takes somebody when they die. Intentionally, he causes that to happen. And we know today that that's not how God works, is by punishing people by causing us to die. But I think this terminology is kind of where that comes from.
Yeah, the American Standard rendered that, hast thou brought evil upon the widow whom I sojourned by slaying, by killing. Any comments on the question that's been posed or the thought that's out there before I would share some things? Yes, Brother Jim.
Only that's, he's a prophet, but he's still a human, and that could be what his thinking was, opposed to what God actually did.
Okay, Sister Kathy.
Don't we see that in the Psalms as well by some of the writers? Same situation. They're people of God that doubts creep in or just sometimes.
Okay, so it's been pointed out by both Brother Jim and Sister Kathy that, and we'll see this, that let's not forget, again, Brother Darrell, I think just mentioned this recently in a lesson. These are people. just like you and I. Yes, he is a prophet and a mouthpiece for God, but that doesn't somehow, he's not able to, basically put off that he's a man. We're going to see something in the book of James about Elijah. You may be thinking about that passage already. How he is like us is what that teaches. And so with that, you think about him. You think about his journey. Him now sent to this woman. This has happened. It's brought about a blessing in her house because she had faith to do what he said, and things have gotten better in the conditions in which they're living here. And then all of a sudden, this son is taken. And if I'm Elijah, I'm kind of probably going, well, what on earth? What else does she have to go through? At the same time, I'm trying to get us to remember what is said in verse 24. See, if I'm Elijah, I don't know how God works. For me to start saying, oh, I know exactly what God is doing here, well, then now I'm going against what Isaiah 55 teaches. His ways are not our ways. He's God. He's sovereign, and he's working through various lives to bring about an end. So when this happens, Elijah simply seems to just be expressing in his humanity, what on earth? What's going on here? Why has this happened? He's not called in the carpet by God for questioning what's going on. God doesn't turn right around and rebuke him in this regards. Yes, sister, and then Brother George.
Well, there's this passage that says, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. So I believe that even if he was responsible for killing the child, he had a reason behind it. And God has a reason behind everything, no matter what happens. And we're just supposed to trust and have faith that he knows what's best for us. And maybe it is causing it to happen, but he had a reason for it that we're not to question.
So in regards to that point, we could find passages in the Bible based upon the actions of people that God did take lives. And for me, personally, based upon what the Bible teaches, to say, well, it's not right for God to do that. Again, I have just stepped into a realm I have no right to step in. He's God. I know what he wishes. I know what he wants in regards to the souls of mankind. But there was two sons of Aaron who did something that they shouldn't have done, and probably, no doubt, knew they shouldn't have done it, and he took their life. Brother George, and then Brother Darrell.
We see, are we seeing, I'll ask you a question, that Elijah's faith is growing, because we see him here at the start. He's been instructed to go and do these things, and then he questions God when the son, the boy, dies. In coming chapters, we'll see his faith grow, and more or less a crescendo, peak, and then we see crack.
That's right. It is. Again, if we're trying to remember what can somebody remind me exactly what James says regarding Elijah? A man in like man as we are. I think the American Standard renders it, I want to say the word there is passions, but I'm going to look it up for us right quick. Elijah was a man of like passions, or nature is the marginal reading. That is James chapter 5 and verse 17. And that talks about how he fervently prayed that it not rain, so forth and so on. You had a comment.
George may be right in that perhaps this was to prepare Elijah for what was coming next. But just think of it from a human point of view. He's been preserving them by making sure they were able to have food. Now for his son to die, for them, this didn't make any sense. So the questioning, I think, is just part of that human thinking and understanding that sometimes we have trouble making our way through.
So again, just to reiterate, the point of questioning when things happen, when we go from the top of the mountain to the valley. It's not wrong for us to question, to wonder. I mean, Job is a great example of that. He's not the only. We could just point that out. We could have lessons on that. But the valid point here, the one that we have to just remember, is that even when we go from the mountain to the valley, and we can't understand, something is going to override our not ability to understand. And that will be what? Our what? Our what in God? Our faith. And that faith comes from where? Hearing. And it's going to come because we have spent time, as we prayed earlier, earnestly wanting to understand God to the best that we can. Because if we'll do that, I'm convinced that the majority of the times we'll be able to process what's going on. And when we can't, our faith will override what we can't process. Is that right? It should be. It should be. But to question or to wonder, it will happen. Anything else? Yes, Sister Kathy.
Just, we have each other, and
Yeah.
there's a room full of people that have had just probably got anything happen in the valley in their
Yeah.
life, and that when someone else is going through it, they can share with us. You just hang in there, remain faithful, and it'll be okay.
That's good. See, we've been knowing each other a long time. That's where I wanted to go for a second, but I thought, well, we're just going. But that's right. That's why we have each other. That's the value in brothers and sisters. That's the value of being there for each other. I have told you before, there may be times that something happens in someone's life that we're just going to make that connection, and they have no idea we're going to make that connection. I've had that happen in my life. People that just show up and say, hey, this is what happened in my life. And had they never said that, I would have thought, well, man, nobody can relate to what's going on. Yes, they could. And yes, we can. Boy, collectively, I have no doubt the experience in this room alone. And when we use that for the glory of God and for the benefit of one another, how great is that? How thankful would we be, not only in this life, but in the life to come? 10,000 years has passed, and you pass that person again who came to you and shared what had happened in their life and helped you get from that valley back up, going on top of that mountain. That's how it works. Anything else? Good. Very good. Thank you for that. It came to pass. Now time has passed, many days. The next phase of Elijah's life. The word of Jehovah came to Elijah the third year. Go show yourself to Ahab. Remember, he's still ruling over the northern kingdom. I'm going to send rain upon the earth. So he went to show himself to Ahab, and the famine, man, it's awful. Sore in Samaria. Ahab calls Obadiah, who was over his household. We don't know exactly which Obadiah this is. We don't know if it's Obadiah who wrote Obadiah. But we do know something about this Obadiah because it's in parentheses here, right? The writer now says, okay, now this Obadiah, he feared the Lord greatly. Now he's fearing the Lord greatly during a time in which he's serving what kind of king? So it is possible, even under the leadership of a really, really evil, bad king, to do what? To still serve God. Because that's what he's doing. And then we find out something else, maybe a little bit more of a clue as far as why Elijah said, go hide yourself. That's what he did. And while he's in hiding, what had Jezebel done? Well, she sought others that were like Elijah in some respect, teachers, followers of the law. When Jezebel cut off the prophets of Jehovah, what Obadiah do? That was the fruit showing that he feared the Lord greatly. What was the fruit? He hid 100 of them. He hid them in 50s, 2 groups of 50s, and he hid them where? He hid them in caves. And not only did he hide them, he provided for them. You said, well, I'm not sure about that meal. Well, it kept them alive. I'm sure they didn't complain. Bread and water. Remember, there's a famine in the land. Not a lot to go around. What a sacrifice. What a risk. What courage this man showed. Even in the face of serving under an evil king. Ahab says to Obadiah, we'll go through the land. You go to all the fountains of water, brooks. Maybe we'll find some grass. Maybe we'll save the horses, that we don't lose all the beasts. And so they divided the land. They passed through it. I think it's interesting. I mean, as best I can tell, Ahab, he's like pretty important as far as the people are concerned. He went one way, the Bible says, by himself. I'm thinking, wow, somebody could pick him off. I mean, Obadiah was Obadiah, but Ahab is like king. Surely there was people with him, but again, they divide. They begin to go through the land. They're looking for some water. Obadiah was in the way, verse 7, and guess who meets him? Well, through God's providence, here comes Elijah. I mean, like Elijah knew where Obadiah was going to be. He had no clue. But he would if God told him where to go. He knew, and of course, Obadiah knows him, and he falls on his face, and he shows the respect to Elijah. And he asked him, are you Elijah? And he says, yeah, it's me. And he said, well, go and tell Ahab Elijah is here. So you're Obadiah. All of a sudden, you happen upon Elijah. He's Elijah. And basically what Elijah says is, go tell Ahab, I'm back. And Obadiah says, well, what have I done to deserve such a thing? Wherein have I sinned that you would tell me to go to Ahab and say this, and he's going to kill me? Because as soon as I leave, again, you're going to be called away. And let me tell you something, Elijah, ever since you've been gone, Ahab has been sending people everywhere looking for you, seeking you, and when you couldn't be found, he would make those people swear or sign an oath or something that they weren't lying about it. He's been looking for you. No wonder God told him to go hide as he did. And as soon as I go tell him, the Spirit of Jehovah, verse 12, will carry you away, and he'll come and you won't be here, and he'll kill me. And then he says regarding himself, end of verse 12, I, thy servant, fear Jehovah from my youth. Didn't you hear what I did, verse 13, when Jezebel slew the prophets of Jehovah, and how I hid 100 men of Jehovah's prophets, 50 in a cave, and fed them with bread and water? And now you tell me, you go and you tell Ahab, Elijah's here, he'll kill me. Elijah reassures him, I'm not going anywhere. Verse 15, I'm going to show myself to him today. And so Obadiah goes. You imagine how that went. Guess who I found? I found Elijah. He comes to Elijah, and the first words out of Ahab's mouth, it's just like silly, isn't it? But as I read it, I'm not reading it where Ahab in any way thinks what he is saying is almost insane. I believe he believes it. He's the one that set this whole course of event into, it started when he did what he did and said what he did, even though he's under the direction of God. Is it you troubler of Israel? And he just answers right back, you got that backwards. I'm not the one who has. You have, and so have all those who've been before you. Because why? Because you've forsaken the commandments of Jehovah. Those two go hand in hand. Trouble and forsaking of the commands. A consequence of forsaking the commands, not obeying the commands of God, then and now. Trouble. You followed Balaam. Now, Elijah tells Ahab, this is the prophet telling the king, send you gather to me all Israel to Mount Carmel. Also, I want the prophets of Baal there, 450. Don't forget, there will be prophets of Asherah, 400. We forget that. We always remember the 450 prophets of Baal, but we don't remember the 400 additional. That's 850 prophets are going to show up in addition to all of Israel. I want all those who eat at Jezebel's table, who think they're privileged. Ahab sends into all the children, verse 20, gathered the prophets together in Mount Carmel. Elijah came near to all the people, and the first question he asked the people is, according to the American standard, how long go ye limping between two sides? Other versions read, Read it out loud. How long do you hesitate between two sides? Anything else? Between two opinions. Falter. How long do you falter between two sides? He's accusing the people of being what? Some other words we might, even biblical words we might think of. Tell me. Double-minded, unstable, wishy-washy. There was a church that one of the churches of Asia that a letter was written to them, and they were guilty of the same thing. They were lukewarm. They weren't hot or cold. Their attention is divided, double-minded. They're thinking, I can do what? I can do both. And yet the Lord would set forth in the Sermon on the Mount, you cannot serve God and mammon. Joshua would say, choose you this day whom. See, it's a choice we have to make. We're not, listen to me, we're not allowed to remain what we believe in the middle. What does that look like? What does that look like if I'm lukewarm or if I'm undecided? What is that going to look like spiritually? You tell me. What are you going to see in my life? If we're hanging out with one another, what are you going to hear coming from me? If that's the case, what are you going to hear? I want you to tell me. I'm sorry? I may say whatever she wants to hear. Tell me again. My language might be suspect. If I'm of the world, then I'm probably listening to a lot of what the world has to say. I'm watching a lot of what the world has to offer. And when I take those things and I put those things in my heart, what eventually happens with the things that are in the heart? They come out in the mouth. What about as far as my zeal for the Lord? You going to see that? You are not going to see that. Zeal for the Lord is going to be someone who basically has said, this is it. I'm going to put all my energy toward that. I'm not talking about perfection here. I'm not talking about sinlessness here. I'm talking about a practice, a habit. And what you're not going to hear coming out of my mouth is things associated. You're not going to see that in my life. You're going to see a constant effort toward righteousness, holiness, because I understand that I am to be set apart. You're not going to see me hanging around certain kinds of people. I'm just not going to be comfortable. You're not going to see me go in certain places because I'm not comfortable in those situations. How do I relate? I can watch the TV, I can watch coaches, I can watch players, and I see the kind of language that the cameras just pick up in the moment. And I'm telling you what, I wouldn't want to hang out with those people. I'd be uncomfortable. If I'm wishy-washy, if I'm just like, it doesn't really matter one way or the other, you know what? I'm hanging out with them. And what they say and what they do, guess what? Doesn't bother me a bit. And I'm really not that excited about being here with you. Oh, I'll come some. I'll put up with you a little bit. But don't ask me to do a lot. Don't ask me to be really faithful. But don't do that because I ain't got time for it. Is that kind of what you see as far as lukewarmness? If it's not, you let me know and I'll make correction. Well, he just wants to know, just make a decision. If God is God, follow him. If Baal, then follow him. You're going to have to decide. Serve God or serve mammon. Choose. Well, did they answer him? No, we would say the cat got your tongue. We don't know. They didn't say nothing. So he said, okay. He then says, I think it's interesting in verse 22, even I only, am left of Jehovah. Seemingly, if he just thinks that through, I'm not saying he's not. He knows he's not because he met Obadiah, and Obadiah's even told him about 100 people who are prophets that He saved their life. Maybe in this situation, I'm the only one being asked to do this, but the Baal, they're 450. That's excluding the other 400. Now he's got this plan. Let's see if we can get through this. 2 bullocks, let them choose 1 bullock for themselves, cut it in pieces, lay it on the wood, put no fire under it. I'll dress the other. We'll lay it on the wood, put no fire under it. You call upon your God, Baal. I'll call upon Jehovah, and we'll see. The God that answers by fire, well, he'll be God. They say, hey, that sounds like a really good plan. Let's do that. So the prophets of Baal chose a bullock, verse 25. They dressed it. They took the bullock, verse 26, called on the name of Baal from morning until noon. You have a part of this cry, oh, Baal, hear us. Well, there was no voice. I just think in these situations, it just would have been just outstanding to be there and to be taking all this in. Maybe I've been sort of a believer full-fledged in Baal, or maybe I'm one of these lukewarm Israelites that's just kind of like limping between the two sides. And I begin to see them call on Baal, and I'm listening, and there is just no response. They leaped about the altar, which was made the altar of Baal. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to say, he gave them every advantage. He let them choose the first goal. He let them go first. He gave them every advantage because he knew that they would succeed.
Sister Audrey points out, Elijah, under the direction of God, gives them every advantage to show that Baal was actually somebody. It came to pass at noon, Elijah mocked them. Boy, he begins to say all kinds of things. Obviously, he had a little bit of a sense of humor here. Cry aloud, cry louder. Maybe he's musing or he's gone aside. Some versions might even say gone aside, gone to relieve himself. Maybe he's on a journey. Maybe he's asleep and you need to wake him up. So they began to take this to a whole nother level, crying aloud, cutting themselves with knives and lances till blood gushed out. They did this again when the midday was past, prophesied to the offering of the evening oblation, but there was no voice. Elijah came near, and verse 30 says, come near. People came near. He repaired the altar of Jehovah. Don't mistake that for the altar that they were using. They were using the altar of Baal. And don't think that the place that this is happening just happens to be just some place that happened just by happenstance. He's under the direction of God. He's been brought to Mount Carmel. And when it's his time, there just happens to be the remains, although broken down, of an altar that once was dedicated to, guess who? Jehovah. He takes 12 stones, according to the 12 tribes, are sons of Jacob, unto whom the word of Jehovah, I'm at the end of verse 31, unto whom the word of Jehovah came saying, Israel shall be thy name. When did that happen? What event brought about the statement to Jacob, Israel shall be your name?
I think it was when he struggled with God all night, or the angel of God all night.
Genesis chapter 32. Look at that toward the end of that. That will be when he wrestled with an angel, but not just any angel. Capital A on that angel. Go back and read it. And in that moment, when that angel didn't prevail, didn't say it couldn't have, touched the sinew of Jacob's thigh and dislocated it, he was able to get away from him. But before he did, the blessing was, Israel shall be your name. 12 tribes of Israel. And he took the stones, he built an altar. He begins to make this trench about it, shows how big it is. He puts wood on top of it, cuts the bullock in pieces in verse 33, laid wood on there. They take jars of water, pour it on the altar. They say, do it a second time. He tells it to do a third time. So now things, as far as the altar is concerned, totally drenched. Remember, it's going to be fire from God that's going to prove who's really God. So much water, everything's wet. The trench is full. It came to pass, verse 36, at the time of the evening oblation, Elijah the prophet came near and said, O Jehovah, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. We noted that last week. He does this because as far as Abraham, Isaac, and Israel are concerned, they're still a what? They're still alive. God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. We talked about those who've died in faith, that we've laid their bodies to rest. They're living. They're still living. just like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Let it be known this day, verse 36, that thou art God in Israel, and that I thy servant, that I am thy servant. And now you should definitely have this underlined, because it says, and that I have done all these things at thy word. You see, none of this has happened in this chapter has been under his own. You know what? I think I'm going to go to Carmel, and I think I'm going to have this out with these prophets of Baal, and we're going to do that. God has directed him to do all this. We're going to give these people an opportunity here to see who really is God, because they can't make up their mind. They're just limping between one. You got like a bird on a pole. It's just sitting there just bumping back and forth. Can't make up its mind. That's the people. But you're going there. This is what you're going to do, and this is how it's all going to unfold. I've done all these things at thy word. Hear me, verse 37, so that the people may know that thou, Jehovah, art God, and thou hast turned their heart back again. The fire of Jehovah fell. Now, again, what's interesting about that and miraculous about that is if you light a fire, which way is the direction of the fire? It goes up. That's how our fires work. Try to make a fire go down like this does. That comes down and now is going to consume a sacrifice that's totally wet. Not only that, what's going to happen to all the water there in the trenches? It licked up the water into verse 38. When all the people saw it, they fell on their faces, and they say, in this moment, Jehovah, he is God. Jehovah, he is God. And Elijah says regarding those prophets, don't let any of them escape. They took the prophets. Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon, and they lost their life there. Now you think about that. You think about dedicating your life to the worship of an idol. And in the last day of your life, nobody shows up, not real, and then your life is taken. And then what do you have to look forward to? Eternal separation from God. Elijah said to Ahab, get up, eat and drink. There's the sound of abundance of rain. He knows it's going to rain. God's already told him it's going to rain. So Ahab went up, he ate and drank. I think it's interesting. We pause for just a moment. Who hasn't been here the whole time? She's pretty important. I thought it was interesting. She's not here. She didn't come to this event. Ahab didn't send for her. I mean, she's going to come on the scene shortly, but she wasn't here during this time. Elijah goes up to the top of the mountain, bowed himself down upon the earth, puts his face between his knees. He said to his servant, now we know there's a servant with him. This won't be the last time we see the servant. The servant will be with him in chapter 19, at least part of the way, until he totally isolates himself. You go up and look toward the sea. And he went up and looked toward the sea, comes back, and what's his report? I don't see a thing. Well, he said, we'll do it 7 times. That number 7, that's always a good one to remember too. 7 and 40, you'll get a lot of answers right. In fact, in the next chapter, you'll get it right. 40, if you use that. Came to pass at the 7th time, he said, behold, there ariseth a cloud out of the sea. But I'm telling you, it's just like the size of my hand. It's just little. He said, you go up to Ahab, you make ready thy chariot, get you down, so that the rain does not stop you. And it came to pass in a little while that the heavens grew black with clouds and wind, and there was a great rain, and Ahab rode and went to Jezreel. And the hand of Jehovah was upon Elijah. He girded up his loins, and he ran he beat Ahab to the entrance of Jezreel. Anybody have a note there on the distance? 14 miles. So a half plus a little. Was there something miraculous about his ability to outrun Ahab in a chariot? Seemingly, and that is in the words, and the hand of Jehovah was on Elijah. Any comments on chapter 18? Remember Brother George's point. And as you continue reading, as we continue looking at Elijah, be encouraged by the things that have been written aforetime, that although these people in many ways were Elijah extraordinary and called for an extraordinary purpose, He still was a man of like nature, just like we are. He should have all kinds of faith, all kinds of courage at this juncture in his life. He's literally been up on a mountain prior to the rain. But shortly he is headed toward another valley, and it is maybe the deepest that he ever went. Keep that in mind. So that when those things happen in our lives, we know it's not unique to us. It's sometimes a part of life, part of maybe the consequences of what happens in our life. Maybe it is the things that Satan does or those who follow him. But then we remember that this too shall pass. We remain faithful to God. And if we have to, we go find others that can help us get back out of that valley, climbing that mountain. Any final comments? Very good. We'll pick up there next week, chapter 19. Elijah, and then here comes Elisha.